to military analytics. A new world order was being established, and soft power players began to change, while the war between Ukraine and Russia showed the importance of alliances like NATO. Military, political, and economic measures against dictatorial and conquering minds grew with the incredible resistance of the Ukrainians. While a brutal aggression threatening the world's democracies and freedom appeared in Eastern Europe, the West did not remain silent. Already in 2014, the West allowed Russia to annex Crimea, perhaps making a mistake they could not make up for. The West does not want to repeat this mistake and is doing whatever is necessary for this. The first big move in the war in Ukraine came from NATO member Turkey. No country dared characterize Russia's so-called special military operation as war. Turkey described the conflict in Ukraine as war and activated the Montreux Agreement and closed the Dardanelles and Bosphorus to Russian warships. In addition, Turkey was the first country to oppose the annexation of Crimea in 2014. Turkey stands out as the strongest geopolitical actor and NATO country in the region. Turkey's friendship with Ukraine and its moderate relations with Russia make it invaluable and indispensable for both NATO, Ukraine, and Russia. Turkey is one of the strongest NATO members and has become the only country to undertake the task of being a buffer zone in terms of both its geopolitical importance and relations with Russia and Ukraine. In this war, it was Turkey that was able to force Russia to make a ceasefire in Ukraine's most difficult moment, saving the lives of thousands of Ukrainians, and even prevented the global hunger crisis by implementing the international grain agreement here. The Russian Federation needed Turkey because a sharp conflict with NATO could trigger a very serious global war. Turkey has always developed moderate political relations with Russia and appeared to be a close Russian ally in its dialogue with the West. Neither friend nor foe. Turkey's strategy was simple, and as we have just mentioned, this policy may have saved millions of lives. At the moment, we see that Russia needs Turkey, both in its situation in the Black Sea and in its relations with the West. However, Russia made a critical mistake the other day. 2 Turkish ships in Kherson port were hit by unidentified missiles. It is an interesting coincidence that Turkish ships were targeted by missiles during Russia's last major missile attack on Ukrainian cities. However, with the latest reckless attack by Russia, it seems to have increased the tension between the two countries. The shooting down of the Turkish flagship Tuzla in Ukraine's Kherson port, most likely by Russian forces, could seriously take these relations to another level and put Russia in a much worse depression in the Black Sea. Considering Russia's relations with Turkey, it can be thought that this missile attack was not intentional. However, we should not forget the 5th article of NATO. When any NATO country is attacked, the alliance has to defend it. Turkey or NATO may describe this as an attack, but we think that the probability of this is low because neither Turkey, the alliance, Ukraine, or Russia want such an escalation. The situation will hurt Ukraine the most. However, we cannot say that Turkey will not do anything against Russia because this is a case in the Black Sea, and Russia may be about to lose a privilege with such an accident or mistake, even if Turkey seems to be moving more slowly since no one was injured in the attack on the Tuzla ship. It can bring the Dardanelles and Istanbul Straits back to the table, not only warships, but also with the embargo that Russia will impose on commercial ships. It can completely prevent Russia's passage to the Black Sea. In addition, while a retaliatory move is planned from Turkey after this incident, it is said that the exercise to be held in Turkey is a clear intimidation against Russia and is the first step to Turkey's retaliation. The biggest winter exercise in the history of the country started in Turkey in 2023. Representatives from 17 countries around the world are participating in the exercises, including the UK, Germany, and Azerbaijan. The army carries out the coordination of actions in the conduct of joint operations. The combat capability of military units as well as combat equipment is checked, especially in severe frost conditions. As a reflection of this, when we turn our eyes to the geography where the war took place, this exercise may have different meanings. NATO clearly seems to be preparing for a new formation in Turkey. Under the leadership of the latter aviation tank units, artillery units, mortar and sniper teams, and special forces participate in military exercises. While the exercises are closely observed, this is interpreted as the beginning of retaliation by Turkey. As we said earlier, at this point, let's try to examine Turkey's political movements up to this attack and how it looks at the passage of the Russian Navy to the Black Sea despite supporting Ukraine militarily. President Erdogan has very important political and economic reasons to maintain good relations with Moscow, so it is unlikely that he will take any steps in the Black Sea that are not strictly regulated in the Montreux Convention. The 1936 Montreux Convention gives Ankara broad right to monitor and limit the types of ships sailing into the Black Sea. How do Turkish officials interpret these rights? Now that war broke out between the two coastal states, the answer can more clearly explain to all of us where Turkey stands with the latest incident. Turkey may imprison the Russian Navy in the Black Sea on March 1st. Shortly after Moscow started the war, Turkey closed the straits to Russian and Ukrainian naval vessels. The decision was based on the Montreux Convention, which stipulated that Turkey is the keeper of the Black Sea's only outlet to the open ocean. Before Monroe, the 1923 Treaty of Lausanne, which established modern Turkey, also placed certain limitations on the control of the straits. The treaty recognized Turkish sovereignty in the Istanbul and Dardanelles Straits, but stipulated that they remain open to unlimited civilian and military traffic under the auspices of the International Straits Commission. However, this arrangement changed in the mid-1930s amid the rise of Nazi Germany. Britain and France abolished the Straits Commission and sought to lure Turkey to their side. These and other developments culminated in the Montreux Convention, which re-established unrestricted Turkish sovereignty over the Bosphorus and Dardanelles Straits. Accordingly, Ankara was free to militarize the strait and asserted certain concessions to regulate sea passage through the straits. In simple terms, Montreux stipulates that merchant ships of all nations must pass freely through the straits. In peacetime, it still prohibits non-riparian states from having a permanent or large naval presence in the Black Sea. Only Turkey, Russia, Ukraine, Romania, Georgia, and Bulgaria can do this. The navies of other states must comply with the convention's strict tonnage and time limits, which in some cases weigh up to 15,000 tons, mainly preventing foreign powers from sending more than 2 or 3 surface combat ships through the straits. On paper, all 6 coastal states share the Black Sea militarily. Yet all 4 have relatively small navies, making the Black Sea de facto maritime possession between Turkey and Russia. Ankara, therefore, sees Montreux as a very suitable document and jealously guards it. This is even more true in situations of war. When the convention authorizes Turkey to close straits to naval vessels of any country, including Russia's, albeit with some caveats. On March 1st, Turkey announced that as long as the fighting continues, Russian and Ukrainian Navy ships will not be allowed to cross from the Mediterranean to the Black Sea. To justify this, Ankara cited Article 19 of the Convention, which authorizes warring countries to close straits unless they return to their ports of registration. At first glance, the closing on March 1st seemed like a neutral measure aimed at limiting the entry and exit of both fighters into the Black Sea. But in reality, the decision was clearly aimed at Russia. At that time, Ukraine had only 1 naval ship and a few patrol boats, all of which were already in the Black Sea, while almost half of Russia's combined Mediterranean Black Sea fleet was deployed outside the straits. This approach is in line with Turkey's broader Black Sea policy, which can be described as pro-Ukrainian neutrality. Although Ankara and Moscow are the main military forces in the region, Russia is both the greater power and the historical foe for Turkey. As a result, Ankara sees all other coastal states as an indispensable counterbalance to Moscow and will do much to prevent Kiev from falling under Vladimir Putin's finger. This includes the sale of drones to Ukraine and the neutral implementation of Montreux that has the practical effect of undermining Russia's local naval presence. However, Turkey took care not to jeopardize its economic ties with Russia while supporting Ukraine militarily. Even though Turkey is getting reaction from some Western states with this balanced policy it has implemented, it has led the moves that saved the lives of many civilians from the Ukraine war and has taken the lead in the evacuation of some cities. It also accomplished what no one else had accomplished by hosting talks between Russia and Ukraine. The Ukrainian army continues to grow stronger day by day with its fight against Russian invaders. The ongoing conflicts in the Donetsk and Luhansk regions have increased their intensity in the new year. The war has spread all over the east of Ukraine. There were very intense clashes on the eastern front. Russian troops tried to advance from eastern Ukraine but failed. Russia lost thousands of soldiers and tons of ammunition in the first week of 2023. Russia started its offensive with missile launchers on New Year's Eve. Russia targeted the fronts in Mykolaiv, Kherson, Donetsk and Luhansk regions by occupying these regions. Putin was planning to expand into Ukrainian territory, but there was one thing Putin forgot. The Ukrainian army was getting stronger day by day in terms of military personnel and ammunition with the support of Western and European countries. The Ukrainian army had deployed military personnel and equipment systems to the entire eastern region, along with the fronts where Russia was concentrated. Soldiers belonging to Russian troops in the region were being monitored by Ukrainian intelligence. On New Year's Eve, there were only a few minutes for all the clashes to take place. Ukraine entered the new year by destroying Russian missiles with its air defense systems. Almost all attacks of the Russian Air Force was blocked by the Ukrainian air defense. Ukraine's counterattacks caused fireballs to appear in the sky throughout New Year's Eve. Ukraine carried out many successful operations on New Year's Eve. One of these operations was an ambush by Ukrainian soldiers on Russian soldiers. Ukrainian soldiers destroyed a Russian tank platoon after a successful ambush. In this operation, which took place 150-200 kilometers behind the battlefront, the Russian army lost dozens of tanks. The Russian army continues to suffer huge losses. Russia has suffered many losses since the first day of the war. Russia has lost more than 110,000 soldiers. It lost over 3,000 tanks, over 6,000 armored combat vehicles, and about 2,000 unmanned aerial vehicles. Having suffered great losses against Ukraine, Russia is now approaching the end. It is stated that Putin cannot solve the problem of soldiers and ammunition. Zelensky, on the other hand, has had many opportunities in the war because of his relationship with the leaders of Western and European countries. Recent videos shared on social media show some of the power of the Ukrainian armed forces. The latest videos show the equipment that Ukraine has acquired with the help of Western countries. Ukrainian soldiers fire these weapons in the video. According to the footage, the weapon they are firing is being used to destroy Russian tanks. It is claimed that there are very few tanks and armored personnel carriers left in Russia. The reason for this claim is the images shared on social media. In the latest images shared on social media, it is seen that tanks belonging to the Russian army and Soviet-made BDR-80 armored personnel carriers are destroyed by the Ukrainian Air Force. The use of Soviet air equipment in the war is interpreted as the Russian army running out of military equipment or that the army does not have modern equipment. The British Ministry of Defense made a statement while it was being said that Russia had a problem with soldiers and ammunition. In the statement, information about Russia's military mobility was shared. The ministry stated that Russian troops are trying to strengthen their positions in the city of Kherson. This region was a region that was under the pursuit of the Ukrainian army to repel the invaders from the Eastern Front. Fighting intensified in this area. Kherson is a city in the Luhansk region. Fighting has intensified in Luhansk and Donetsk regions over the past few months. Russia had also suffered heavy losses in Kherson in recent weeks. Images of these losses have emerged. The footage shows the Ukrainian 59th Motorized Infantry Brigade destroying two Russian T-64 BV model tanks. In the footage recorded with a drone, it is seen that the Russian tanks exploded violently and became unusable. Russia had to withdraw many of its troops from Kremlin. Kremlin is still under Russian rule, but after increasing losses, it seems that Russia's dominance here will come to an end. Kremlin is a very important city for both countries. Sergei Haidai, the governor of the Luhansk region, stated that if the Russians lose this region, they will lose their entire defense line because this region is located in a strategic position on the Russian-Ukrainian border. Casualties mounted as the war intensified. Russia lost over 110,000 soldiers. The armed forces of Ukraine made a statement about the attacks and increasing losses. Important points were mentioned in this statement. The Ukrainian armed forces said that all the attacks they carried out were aimed directly at Russian targets. He also stated that this is the difference between the Ukrainian army and the Russian army because the Ukrainian armed forces stated that Russia attacked civilians and made plans over civilian targets. Putin's attacks on civilian areas may be aimed at breaking the morale and motivation of the people because Putin wants to break the will to fight off the faithful Ukrainian people who resist the occupation. The reason for this is that he has not been successful on the front line. When Putin fails in physical warfare, he tries to make psychological breakthroughs. But the Ukrainian people are getting stronger with every attack. They believe more Putin continues to lose in every field. That's why the number of calls for negotiations from Russia is increasing in the last week. As the war has intensified, Russian and Ukrainian leaders have expressed their openness to peace talks in the last month or two. Calls for peace negotiations have increased. This is because both countries have suffered in the war. Russia has been hit hard by Western and European sanctions. Russia is facing huge problems, both militarily and economically. The Russian people are organizing demonstrations and protests almost every day for an end to the war. Russia is not giving up on its conditions for peace talks. Ukraine, on the other hand, does not accept these conditions. Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba stated that peace talks can be held with the mediation of the United Nations. One of the latest statements about the peace negotiations came from Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Erdogan had a telephone conversation with Russian President Vladimir Putin and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. After the call, he stated that calls for peace and negotiations should be supported by a unilateral ceasefire and a vision of a just solution. As calls for peace negotiations increase, so does the intensity of the war. Russia has retreated on many fronts. Ukraine continues its successful offensive. Fighting has increased in the eastern region. The war is spreading to more and more regions every day. Russian forces attempted to complement the recent offensive to the north of Bakhmut by developing attacks to the south. However, Ukrainians understood that this was the next logical step, and to send the best sniper, artillery, and drone crews to make sure that Russians do not cross the main street. So when Russians started launching their attacks, they lost one assault unit after another. Within minutes last, hematology that Russian conventional forces reinforced the Wagner Group, took over the offensive operation, and breached the Ukrainian strongpoints to the north by overwhelming Ukrainians with the sheer number of troops. I also told you that Ukrainians started preparing for a similar attack from the south. The freshest report suggests that Ukraine has established permanent surveillance of Russian positions along Kazanskaya Street and are eliminating all Russian reconnaissance groups already on the approach. The footage released by the Ukrainian 93rd Mechanized Brigade shows how drone operators coordinate with an artillery crew and destroy a Russian assault unit the moment it tries to cross Krasinski Street. Such continuous action successfully prevented Russians from developing offensive actions from a secondary axis. What complicates the situation for Russians even more is that this area basically has nothing to hide behind. Since the clashes here have been taken for months and all the houses in the region are quite small, everything was gradually leveled with the ground, making attacks from this direction as dangerous as attacking through the fields. When it comes to the central part of the region, the Ukrainians are still holding positions on the train station. The soldiers that are defending it said that Russians are increasing the pressure after they established control over grain elevators, as recent geolocated footage confirms that Russians indeed crossed the rails and are operating in the vicinity of the grain elevators in the northern part of the region. The fighting continues. One of the fighters said that intense artillery fire brought the Russians to senses and forced them to stop pushing further. Today, Ukrainians tried to regain the initiative and counterattack Russians along the whole line. Russians reportedly started retreating, although they did put up an intense fight, and overall resistance was immense. Combat footage released by the Ukrainian side shows that the Ukrainians are operating in small assault units in order to test Russian defense capabilities from all sides. Whenever a group advances, it tries to leverage the gains immediately to help other units breach their strongpoints. Today, commander of the Ukrainian 1st Border Detachment, which is responsible for the southern line, stated that they meet Wagner forces quite rarely and that almost all attacks are already conducted by regular Russian forces. The statement confirms my analysis based on the footage of fights and prisoners of war. Today, Ukrainians reportedly took captive several more dozens of soldiers and showed weapons taken as trophies. This is less than yesterday, although still much more than usual. A lot of those captives were taken near the home of a road. A fighter from the Adar battalion reported that yesterday they forced a group of Russians to surrender in the aftermath of an unsuccessful Russian assault. Fighters from the Da Vinci Wolves battalion showed the video of how they got encircled, held an all-round defense, and still repelled the massive Russian attack in order to not allow Russians to move freely in the region and prepare for their assaults. Ukrainians are also conducting assaults. Today, the Da Vinci Wolves Battalion showed the aftermath of a successful assault on Russian positions. Prior to this assault, the drone operators, in coordination with artillery crews, increasingly targeted Russians in the trenches. As a result, they managed to undermine a Russian strongpoint and reduce control over the region after a successful assault. Overall, Ukrainians are keeping Russians away from the main supply routes to Bakhmut and are conducting counterattacks to push them even further whenever possible inside Bakhmut. Ukrainians managed to prevent a similar development of offensive actions in the south by establishing tight control over the region and preventing Russians from concentrating their forces by immediately targeting all units that got out of cover. It looks like the situation stabilized, and as said by a soldier from the 24th Assault Battalion, if Ukrainians break Russian momentum in the north, then Bakhmut will continue to hold.